Beneath Englesia, beneath the white stone banners and the polished prayers of the capital, there waited a second kingdom, older and far more honest in its cruelty. The catacombs had grown over centuries, carved deeper by fear, strategy, and the ancient expectation that one day the skies themselves might descend in wrath. Above, the public halls served as shelters for the frightened and the faithful. Below, the labyrinth narrowed into a secret architecture of suffering. And there, the true face of the capital breathed in silence, wearing the shape of research, obedience, and ambition. Rainer hung inside that silence like a man left behind by the world. He had once carried authority, steel, and honor in the knightly ranks of Englesia, yet honor had long since been stripped from him, layer by layer, until only a body remained for others to study. His breath came ragged and shallow, and his thoughts circled the same wound again and again. The betrayal of his order, the abandonment of his house, the collapse of every promise he had once trusted. The lab had taken his rage and fed upon it. It had taken his fear and sharpened it. Then it had taken his body and remade it, strengthening muscle, bone, and skin until he became a thing both prized and broken, a test case with a pulse. Another failure, a voice had once muttered around him, almost amused, almost bored. That guy was a lot softer than I thought. Those words remained lodged in him like thorns. They belonged to a world that viewed suffering as methodology and lives as material. The inquisitors below the capital spoke of monsters, demon factors, spiritual life, incarnation, and enhancement, as if they were discussing weather. They studied the way demons entered flesh through will, the way magicules rewrote cells, the way a human body could be turned toward power or ruin. Their theories carried a terrible elegance. Their conclusions carried blindness. They believed physical strength would open the gate. They believed the mind would follow. They believed poison could become divinity if measured carefully enough. Rainer understood enough of the process to dread it, and enough of his own ruin to crave any door that opened. The lab had fed him resentment like a daily ration. It had left him with one steady flame: hatred. Hatred for Rimuru, whose name had become a symbol of everything that had collapsed around him. Hatred for Hinata, whose blade and judgment had shattered the old certainty of his life. Hatred for the kingdom that had chosen a hidden cellar of torture over open disgrace. Yet even that hatred trembled, because the body beneath it had been forced through enhancement before any true demonic fusion could begin, leaving him powerful enough to survive and fragile enough to suffer forever. Then, the hidden passage stirred. Above the labyrinth, the capital slept beneath the surface of ceremony and law. Below, another party entered through the old bones of the city, using the catacombs as a wound in the earth. Feldway came with measured certainty, and Vega led the way with the strange confidence of one who understood both violence and mockery as tools. Arius followed in silence. Mai moved with the cool attention of a blade waiting for the right angle. 4 figures walked through corridors that had witnessed centuries of sealed fear, and each step carried the weight of a larger design. Who? You found it that easy to get in? Feldway's voice held genuine approval, which made it more unsettling than contempt would have been. Vega only smiled and kept moving, because this mission favored speed and instinct over ceremony. Their broader plan had already unfolded in pieces elsewhere. Fen would draw the Demon Lord's attention with spectacle and devastation. Zerario would stand ready above. Xeranis would strike at Milim's domain, and Feldway's own strike would target the World Congress and the figure at its center, Masayuki. Every thread of the strategy depended upon chaos arriving in stages, each crisis feeding the next until the octagram stumbled beneath its own divided gaze. The hidden passages beneath Englesia offered a gift to that design. The route bypassed the city's barrier and delivered the intruders into the very heart of the capital's buried shame. Vega recognized the place at once. He had been born from violence and experimentation, and the sight of cages and chambers seemed to wake old memories in him rather than wound him. That familiarity made him smile. "Ah, I remember this place well," he said, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "They worked on me here too." Rainer heard the voice before he understood it. Hope arrived first as confusion, then as disbelief. A stranger stood before the cage with an easy grin and a tone that carried warmth instead of cruelty. The effect was almost unbearable. "Hey, partner," Vega said gently. "How are you holding up?" Reiner stared, trying to reconcile the man before him with the predators that had prowled these halls for months. Vega looked almost casual, almost kind, and that kindness struck deeper than any threat. The prisoner's mind, starved of trust, rushed toward the possibility of rescue with desperate speed. He asked the obvious question, then another, and Vega answered with a steady smile, offering only enough truth to make the lie unnecessary. He explained that he had known the same suffering. He spoke like an old comrade rather than a conqueror. He named himself one of the alumni, a survivor of the same hell. Reiner felt the first crack in the wall of his fear. "Help me," he cried, the words ripping out of him in one raw exhalation. "If you want my loyalty, I'll swear it with everything I have." Vega accepted the plea with almost casual grace, then placed a hand upon the enchanted bars and tore them apart as though opening a curtain. The cage gave way. Reiner saw the strength behind the gesture and understood, with a shivering clarity, that he had already chosen the right side of this moment. Around him, other Inquisitors lay dead at Arius's feet, their patrols erased before they could raise a warning. The facility, so confident in secrecy, had already begun to die. Feldway watched with keen interest. Reiner was only one prize among many. Nearly 100 bodies waited in those chambers, each one strengthened enough to matter, each one shaped by pain into a vessel fit for further use. Feldway's thoughts moved through possibilities with merciless precision. Why waste such material? Why leave enhanced flesh unused? A dozen plans rose in him at once, and each one promised more power, more incarnations, more leverage against the world above. Vega, meanwhile, kept smiling at Reiner as if they were old soldiers reunited after war. "All right," he said. "From this day forward, you're under my command." The sentence struck Reiner with a strange comfort. Command had once meant duty. Here, command meant escape. It meant purpose restored to the wreckage of his life. He turned, called to the other prisoners, and found their faces already lifting toward the same desperate hope. Most were soldiers, criminals, or condemned men. Many had lost families, comrades, or entire futures to the lab's twisted methods. Their resentment burned bright. Their fear had already spent itself. When Vega promised to free them, they followed him as if moving toward a second birth. Mai stepped forward with the calm efficiency of one who had prepared for this moment. She had already procured additional bodies for the incarnation ritual, soldiers selected for strength and utility. The process began beneath the capital, deep in the hidden dark, where human will and spiritual force met in a contest for ownership. Reiner felt the ritual's pressure surge around him, a tremendous inward gravity that asked a single question: which will would command the body when the old self began to split? The answer came through action. Power flooded him. The pain ceased to matter. A god-class weapon rested in his hand, a blade granted through Vega's skill, and the weapon's weight felt like the first honest thing he had touched in months. His soul surged under the pressure of the new incarnation, and he emerged from the ritual, changed beyond the reach of the people who had once condemned him. His companions changed with him. The lab's victims became a strike force. The capital's secret shame became an army in motion. Then the world above trembled. At Skyspire Tower, a shudder ran through the holy void of Damargonia, and the old fear of giants stirred like a buried beast. Ultima felt the disturbance first and spoke with sharp amusement that carried an edge of alarm. Veyron and Zonda moved at her command, one seeking contact, the other racing to preserve the chain of information before the situation swallowed it whole. The tower's communications had already gone blind beneath magical ceiling, and that alone told them enough. A catastrophe had already begun. Ultima bit her nail and considered the likely shape of ruin. "If that prediction lands," she murmured, "escape deserves attention." The Demon Queen trusted Rimuru's judgment, and that trust sharpened her perception rather than softening it. She had heard his concern about Dagrol, the strange insistence with which that ancient giant had sought contact with Veldora, the odd tension around the Walpurgis Council, the faint scent of concealed danger. Ultima knew Dagrol's history well enough to suspect layers beneath every statement. A giant of that age, that strength, that pride, carried old storms inside him. A man like that could guard a tower for centuries and still conceal a future wound behind his calm. Daggerel stood at the summit of Skyspire and remembered the last council, the uneasy harmony of demon lords, the new transfer magic circle, the strange satisfaction he had felt when Rimuru's people completed the work. He had admired the creation deeply. It solved practical hardship, promised trade, and hinted at a future less punishing than the one his people had endured in the desert. His gratitude toward Rimuru remained sincere. His wariness toward Feldway remained equally sincere. So when Feldway reached him through telepathy, Daggerel answered with the worn patience of a man who had already made his choice. Feldway tried to tempt him, then tried to provoke him, then tried to stir the old savage legend still rumored around his name. Rebel Giant, God of Destruction, Earthquake. The words drifted through the conversation like bait dropped into deep water. Daggerel took none of it. His answer came with calm finality, and that calm carried far more power than rage would have given him. The past is past, he said in essence, and the truth behind the statement rang like iron. He remained loyal to the future he had begun to imagine, a future shaped in part by Rimuru's cunning, and in part by the hope that his own land might finally breathe easier. Glusord stood beside him, steady and grounded, while Veyron arrived with suspicion and found his accusation dissolving in the face of the brothers' clarity. Ultima arrived shortly after, saw the pattern at once, and voiced the hidden meaning with a grin that sharpened the air. Daggerel, she understood, had provoked suspicion deliberately, forcing everyone to recognize the threat of infiltration and mind control before it became a blade in the dark. Daggerel laughed when she named it. Relief crossed his face with open sincerity. He admired her insight, and she admired the labyrinth of his thought. Together, through a misunderstanding rooted in mutual suspicion and strange loyalty, they arrived at the same conclusion: prepare, endure, answer force with force. Their alliance settled into place as naturally as stone finding bedrock. On the horizon, Malim's forces watched the sky with mounting unease. Elsewhere, battle gathered itself from pieces. Beneath Englesia, the forgotten prisoners stepped into the light of a secret war, carrying with them the fury of every body the lab had tried to break. Above, the tower held its breath. And somewhere between those worlds, as hidden plans met open consequence, the first true impact of Feldway's design began to unfold.